Hello, folks. Welcome to Inside the Marble Palace, Post Media Saskatchewan's look at the goings on in the Saskatchewan legislature. I'm Murray Mandrick, political columnist for the Regina Leader Post. Joining me, as always, Jeremy Symes, our political reporter. And thank you for joining us again, Mickey Rich from Canadian Press in Saskatchewan, who is doing her farewell tour before leaving us for Ottawa. So we're so happy to have her once more. And she got to cover the fun and excitement of a mid-year financial statement in Saskatchewan. I guess we can start with Jeremy. What was in it? Why should we be excited about it other than it confirms why we're getting our Mo money?
Yeah, I mean, for journalists and reporters, I don't know if it was too exciting. Maybe the only exciting thing is that we, in fact, do have lots of money coming in.
Yeah.
We have our 1.1 billion surplus still looks to be on track. So what that means is the government can pay for your $500 affordability checks. That is costing them 415 million to do that. Other than that, there wasn't too much else new. Minister Donna Harper said we're going to continue to pay down the debt of 1 billion there. We're going to continue with the tax hike freeze we had on small businesses. We are going to continue by not increasing that PST for gyms and whatnot, and they rolled that back a while ago. So why this is all kind of relevant is the opposition has been asking the government to do more with this money that the province has, this 1.1 billion surplus, and they want the government to cut taxes, they want the government to spend more on healthcare, they want the government to stop the hike on fees, and just use more with the money that they have. So they say these resources belong to all of us and we should do more with it. The government's saying, yes, the resources do belong to everyone, but what we're doing is the right approach and we aren't going to do more. They think paying down the debt is the best approach because it does save money down the line, and they think the $500 checks are a good measure. So if you did follow the numbers a little bit closely, like there was a 50.1 million more in surplus we are getting from first quarter, so we are making a smidge more money technically, or at least that's what's forecasted. Um, Minister Harper said maybe that could be used on healthcare, but I don't think we'll see anything new until we get our budget in the spring.
I guess, Mickey, what I found kind of new and or interesting is, well, the fact that we do have a surplus, which is kind of new for budgets under Premier Mo and former Premier Wall, who we'll probably talk about a little bit later on in a minute. But there is this interesting acknowledgement that this is one-time money, and in that regard, one-time money very much seems to be uh, about paying down debt, about what Jeremy describes in terms of money. Uh, did you sense that difference in terms of today's, or sorry, Wednesday's announcement, or Tuesday's announcement, I guess, versus maybe other budgets, mid-year updates that you've seen?
Yeah, I think that we really are benefiting from resources that you mentioned. Even Deputy Finance Minister Max Hendricks was saying that potash is really doing the heavy lifting that's bringing in the revenue. And Finance Minister Donna Harpower, she did say that when you have, money that fluctuates so much from natural resources, there's really only certain ways that you can spend it. And she says that's either through giving, checks to people. Another way is investing in infrastructure projects because then the costs are there and dealt with. But they're not going down that route because there's a lot of private investment in the province, and starting this summer there's going to be some construction work and they don't want to compete with workers there. And then the other avenue as well is things that we've seen them do already, like the tax break that Jeremy mentioned. But yeah, the NDP would have loved them to see to have them do a little more, like repeal the PST that they recently added on entertainment events. But the government the NDP can't complain about the checks too much. But I think they would like to see more handed out to, like they've mentioned before, children.
And meanwhile, we're back in the same business as we have been all session, talking about the Saskatchewan First Act, talking about a whole series of legislation pieces this session that seem to be designed to Saskatchewan territory on constitutional grounds, on other things. And in a second, we'll get into how Alberta is doing that slightly differently. But Jeremy, I want to start with you first because it was fascinating to a lot of people. A lot of buzz about this on Twitter as to why the NDP might have supported the Saskatchewan First Act on second reading. A lot of people within their own party structure, including former candidate Caitlin Harvey, who ran against Carla Beck for the leadership, were very unhappy about this. Can you explain why that would happen? How does an opposition ever wind up supporting a government bill of consequence when they've been rather critical of that government bill?
Yeah, it was kind of surprising to me because before the Twitter storm happened, we had Premier Scott Moe tweeting on Twitter the night before, being like, the NDP have supported the Saskatchewan First Act in second reading. And I saw that tweet and I was like, what? There must be some kind of story here that seems really strange because, they have been critical of some parts of the act, right? And usually oppositions oppose almost everything. So what happened was it was Monday night. They had a vote, a second reading vote of the Saskatchewan First Act. That passed 43-0 in the House unanimously. And what second reading is according to the government's or the legislature's website, is the chamber is agreeing to the bill in principle, and then it gets sent to committee. So by the NDP voting yes, there was a lot of questions about, okay, well, do they actually support this act? And to be honest, that was one of the trickier things to get out of them, just to get a really clear answer on, do you support this or not? And so we asked this, and there were some MLAs saying, well, we voted yes because it would just send it to committee, but even if they voted no, it would have gone to committee anyway. And so there's just still those lingering questions about, okay, well, then why vote yes? Anyways, they were saying we voted yes because we wanted to get it to committee. I spoke to Carla Beck yesterday just about it, and she said they stand by this decision because they kind of agree with parts of the bill. They agree that Saskatchewan should assert its constitutional rights. And if you go back to the NDP of the 70s or the 80s, under Blake, or not under Blakeney, sorry, it was under Romano, but they basically, he worked to give Saskatchewan the rights over the resources in the Constitution. And so they have that history there. So that's why it might not be surprising as to why they voted yes. Where the controversy comes in is because we have people like Caitlin Harvey, we have people a little bit more left leaning who are still part of the NDP, and they don't want their party to be agreeing with the government on something like this when they think consulting with Indigenous groups is really important, and that they feel that Indigenous groups aren't part of the Saskatchewan First Act. Now, you speak with Nicole Sarr or Carla Beck, and they say, yes, we are concerned about that consultation and how that wasn't done. And if we get this into committee, we can maybe ask more of those hard questions and get more of a real answer to that. But it's just an optics issue, right, for them in terms of their left base. Anyways, we'll see where it goes into committee, and we'll see what happens in third reading, whether they will vote yes or no. I will point out on a procedural note, Jeremy Harrison, the House leader for the government, asked for a recorded vote. That normally doesn't happen in second reading. So when he asked for a recorded vote, he asked for people to stand up and say yes or no. So usually these things go through. We don't really know what people really think, but the government wanted it on the record so they could come out and say, hey, look, they support our legislation.
It was certainly a bit of a tempest in a teapot. And the interesting thing to me, Mickey, is that the NDP position all along has been this act is much ado about nothing. Two Shakespeare references in the same sentence. How about that? And the fact that it's much ado about nothing would be seen to me grounds for the NDP not to support it. But all that said, as Jeremy said, there's a legitimate reason to move it forward and have this discussion about this. This is so different than the conversation that's going on in Alberta right now. And because you work for Canadian Press, you probably are touching on that maybe more so than we are. What do you see as the major differences, or better put, what does Scott Moe see as the major differences? Because I was a little surprised at his answer when he was asked by you and Jeremy and other reporters about that very thing Wednesday.
Yeah, and I should note, I wanted to note too with the, official opposition here, the NDP, I think their stance of voting yes to move it to committee was that sure, of course, we're going to vote yes because our constitution, the Canadian Constitution, states that natural resources are in the jurisdiction of the province. So, yes, we agree with the Constitution, and that's why they feel like they wanted to vote yes, going toward committee. And yes, we've seen the Alberta Sovereignty Act now that has been tabled in Alberta. Mo didn't really say too much about this. He said that he's been briefly briefed on the matter, but he said that anything that can, basically have provinces reassert their own jurisdiction is a good thing. I have noticed that the premier has taken um, a little different stance in his language when he speaks about these issues. He always likes to mention now that Canadians are in this together. We have to look out for each other and what we have to offer the nation as a whole, whether it be manufacturing in Ontario or natural resources here in the province. He does feel that, as Canadians, we should be championing each other. And even though it's called the Saskatchewan First Act here, he has said that it's Canada first. He said yesterday that we all need to continue to respect each other as Canadians, and it's Canadians first and foremost. Now, this is something that he's now said probably twice in the last few weeks, which I do think is.
That is interesting. Yeah, it is a change in tone. Do you think, and you sense that was a little bit more prominent on Wednesday? I'm sorry, my days mixed up. On Wednesday than you had heard it in the past, Mickey?
Yeah, I think so. I think that what we're seeing, and Carla Beck mentioned this the other day when she was talking about the Saskatchewan First Act, is that she's noticed that people are tired of the divisions, and she doesn't want to get into the type of politics that create divisions, and more so focuses on policies. And I kind of feel that sense from the premier as well when he does talk about unifying Canadians that are on topics that are important to people regardless of what jurisdiction that you're in. And he says that at the end result with the Alberta Sovereignty Act is that he said that if it pushes the ball along with respect to provinces being able to take up their provincial jurisdiction under the Constitution, then he's supportive of that. And he did note several times that as long as the Alberta Sovereignty Act, follows the Canadian Constitution and follows the rule of law, he can get behind that. But he did note that.
And obviously, there's a significant amount of politicking behind this because in Saskatchewan, as in Alberta, especially in Alberta, there is a lot of support for anything that is critical of the federal Justin Trudeau Liberal government right now. And it's obviously been a driving force in this. We can hear it in the legislature on a daily basis when they talk about Justin and Jagmeet and the NDP answering to their rulers. That's it. As much as the problem, as Jeremy outlined, that the NDP seem to have on their own political left, maybe towards the fringes of the party, it certainly seems on the right that there is growing problems, not lesser problems, but growing problems for Scott Moe and the Sask Party. And this week, they took the form of a whole new other party. So tell us about uh, the arrival of the Saskatchewan United Party. Today is an official party, Jeremy, and what their new appointed leader, Nadine Wilson, was saying in the legislature about it, and what else she was raising in the legislature.
Yeah, absolutely. So this is the Saskatchewan United Party, and because Nadine Wilson is a member of the Legislative Assembly, it means we have a third party represented in our chamber. I don't know when the last time we would have had that, but there was a lot of questions as to whether this party would come through. We saw this back in the spring, where there was a lot of talk about, actually earlier, a lot of talk about a new party coming. A lot of people unhappy with the Saskatchewan party, and particularly around the decisions they made around vaccination mandates, specifically going, showing your proof of vaccination if you wanted to go eat somewhere and that sort of thing. So that's where a lot of the grievances came And that's what kind of galvanized these folks to kind of come together and create what we're seeing is the Saskatchewan United Party today. So what it means is they got enough signatures to be registered with Election Saskatchewan. It means they can start, collecting donations and issuing those tax receipts to folks, and also gives them more of a voice in our political system too, right? Which is interesting. And what's also interesting is just kind of I was asking Nadine Wilson today, okay, so what what is your party going to be standing for? What are some of the issues? And she wasn't really giving us much. She said, I'll have more to say later. Um, right now, I want to focus on people who have experienced vaccination injuries. And that's who she brought into the legislature today, was folks who believe they've been injured by the vaccine and that they want to speak with the government about that. And they feel that they've been left behind and they feel like no one is representing them. And they don't feel the media is actually representing them either. And so she came in to voice these concerns. And I think that kind of speaks to a little bit about what the Saskatchewan United Party is going to be about. It's going to address this specific issue about the pandemic. It's not so much what we see sometimes on the left about mask mandates and all that. It's more about on the right, where we see more about ideas around libertarianism, freedom, that sort of thing. So yeah, we'll see what else they bring up. I was looking at their Twitter account and they were talking about getting tough on crime. They're talking about the budget too. And I think a lot of them feel that Saskatchewan has been spending a lot of money and is in a lot of debt. And they think that we need to lower taxes and get our fiscal house in order. The folks behind the Saskatchewan United Party is Jerry Ritz, who is a former cabinet minister with the Stephen Harper government. He was the agriculture minister. He was an MLA representing Battleford's Lloydminster for 20 years. I don't know what he's going to be doing now, but he was one of the main figureheads that I'm assuming pulled a lot of these signatures together to get this off the ground. They got Nadine as leader, how I understand it, because she actually has a seat in the House, so it does allow her to bring some of their issues up. And yeah, we'll see what else goes forward. We know we have the Buffalo Party, and they've also been making some waves, I guess, because they say they've seen increased support because of the mandates that came forward. There was another movement called True North. It'll be interesting to see if they come together and try and be a little bit more united on the right, I guess you could say. But yeah, we'll see where that goes. The minister Hindley was just saying, every time Nadine got up to ask her questions, was just like, well, you should resign, you should run in a by-election, you're the leader. You should go up against your constituents that you say you represent so well. So that's where the government's at with that. They interestingly, they introduced a bunch of firearms and other stuff today. I know you're gonna.
I could get you.
Yeah, but go ahead.
I could get you to get into that in a second, but I just want to bring Mickey in here real quick because I love the perspectives here, in the sense that I'm struggling to understand or see sometimes how much this hurts the government and how much it actually might help them in some ways. I see where it does hurt the government because it's divided vote and it's not keeping the big Sass Party tent together. However, there is an argument that by opposing some of the more radical stuff that we saw that we're seeing from the Saskatchewan United Party and maybe some of the more out there notions that we heard from the vaccine sufferers today, whatever their issues may be, that might ground the Sass Party towards the center. How do you think, Mickey, you're seeing this played out in the two things of, does it help? Where does it help, and where does it really kind of really hurt the Sass Party to have this particular alternative on the right, but all these other alternatives on the right, as Jeremy spoke to?
I believe the Saskatchewan Party government is just making them, I think they're just highlighting their democratic process opposed to maybe the lack of democratic process when it comes to SUP. Minister Henley did stand up in the House saying, "Oh, I must have missed the leadership race," which, I believe there wasn't one. At the same time, it was Election Saskatchewan, the independent provincial that organizes, provincial electoral events independently, that announced this party that was coming up. And even, Nadine Wilson today, in the scrums was saying that she wasn't even aware that she was leader. But then yet you have Election Saskatchewan saying that she is the leader of this party. I'm not sure if the government is taking this seriously. I don't know what to take of it when the leader is saying she's unsure if she's the leader. I think we're all just seeing how this is going to play out. And the reason why she said she's not sure if she's the leader is that she's waiting for paperwork. She didn't disclose what that paperwork is. But obviously, Election Sask, which oversees electoral events, has said she's the leader. So I'm not sure why she doesn't believe that she's the leader. I'm just curious to see, how this plays out. And she does get 5 minutes every Thursday to and ask questions in the House, and her questions very much have been focused on vaccine injuries, which the government has pointed out that it's very, very minimal, and statistically across Canada and in this province, it shows that people who don't get the vaccine will experience more, you know, I guess reaction, or what's the word I'm looking for? More symptoms from actually getting COVID-19 than if you were to get the vaccine. So the government is assuring the public that the vaccine is safe to take, and that's also a strong stance that this government is saying publicly in the House.
Yeah, and that could very well be helpful in terms of a government that struggles to be seen right now as being more moderate than not. But getting back to the legislation you were talking about, Jeremy, and this whole session has been about legislation that is sometimes symbolic and sometimes to deal with issues that are being raised. Certainly, some of the issues that legislation we saw today on firearms. Certainly, some of the legislation that we saw today could be seen, even in terms of the legislation responding to dangerous offenders. This legislation could be seen as a direct response, if not to the political parties, the tide that they kind of represent in terms of those right-wing concerns out there. Tell us a little bit about that legislation today, if you can, Jeremy, and how it kind of fits into the legislative agenda, if there is ever a theme to legislative agendas during a sitting.
Yeah, the sitting so far has been really like crime heavy, I find, at least from the government, because we had the announcement of the Marshal Service earlier and we talked about that. And now what has been announced is the Saskatchewan government plans to, um, I guess, suspend government assistance that's given to prolific violent offenders. So basically, if there's a prolific violent offender on warrant out there in the province, what the government wants to do is they want to try and locate this individual. And if they are receiving any kind of government support, like a CIS payment or anything like that, they want to claw that back because they feel like the government shouldn't be funding these prolific violent offenders that are at large and that the minister thinks should be in jail. So what kind of sparked this was the James Smith Cree Nation event, which we are all aware of, and the event there in Weldon. And I know, Mickey, you were there. If you want to chat more about it, that'd be great. What we learned today was that Miles Sanderson, who is one of the killers in that, he was receiving government assistance at the time, and so I guess that's where you can see the minister finding this out and going, okay, that's not okay. We need to be cracking down on this in a way. What they don't want to do is they don't want to take assistance away from individuals that could inadvertently maybe hurt their family members or their spouses or anything like that. So how I understand it is they're going to work really hard to, when they're looking at pulling assistance away from someone, they're going to look at all the factors involving this person, whether they have kids or a spouse or whatever, and just make sure it doesn't do any further damages to their family, because they don't want to hurt anyone further who need our social supports. The second piece that came had to do with firearms, and the government says this is meant to protect quote unquote law-abiding firearms owners. This is really in response to a lot of the federal government bans we're seeing, the buyback program, where people are being asked to sell their guns back to the federal government. The minister characterized it as confiscating. I'm not sure if that's really what's going to be happening here, but that's where we're seeing the political tones change. But what it kind of does is say, and this is aside from that. So what it would do is say if someone has a firearm and they're not storing it legally, or they're not like storing it away properly, they could get charged, but there's going to be a new mechanism where they could get a ticket and then kind of like a warning and an explanation on how to properly store their firearm. I think this is also just in response to maybe criminals breaking into places, stealing guns, and then going out and using them. They're just trying to make sure those guns don't get out and taken by those people. Um, in terms of RCMP and political stuff around the confiscation stuff, it was interesting because I think, Mickey, you asked if RCMP are coming and taking guns, what does that mean for RCMP and funding? And Minister Tell was like, well, all options are on the table. And then she said, it could get interesting. So we could see a little bit more political fight over RCMP in the future if the federal government pursues with this buyback program in a way that the province doesn't see going well for them.
That is interesting. What did you read into her messaging, Mickey? What was kind of intriguing to you in terms of Minister Tell's response?
Yeah. So the RCMP, they really do just essentially provide a service in this province, and they're funded by the federal government and the province. So, if the federal government now has this new policy where perhaps they're asking RCMP to collect these guns, I asked, if you don't agree with that as a province, then would you maybe reduce funding for the RCMP? And that's when she said, all options are on the table, that being one of them. I believe the province funds the RCMP up to around $70 million. There's other approaches the province is willing to take. And she did mention, Minister Tell, Jeremy, what was it? They're creating a ballistic
chamber, which is really interesting, actually. If you want to go ahead and talk about that.
Yeah, the province is essentially creating a ballistics chamber where you can safely dispose of guns after testing them. And essentially, Minister Tell was saying, if it does come to that point where the federal government is destroying guns in this province, they're not going to allow. The province does not want to allow them to do that at the provincial lab. So if the feds want to destroy Saskatchewan guns, I asked, well, then what happens to the guns? And Minister Tell essentially just said, they're going to have to figure it out. So they don't want to do anything to help. From my viewpoint, the province doesn't want to do anything to easily assist the federal government in these gun policies.
It's fascinating to me in terms of this ongoing war, and I guess how the nature of the Sask Party has kind of changed from maybe the way it was established. And we had a bit of a nostalgia this week. It was actually a pretty good week for the government and the Sask Party, really, because the midterm statement was strong, and they did put forward some strong legislation. Plus, they had this disagreement within the NDP ranks as to how they should be handling the Saskatchewan First Act. But one of the things that was kind of, I think, uplifting for the Sask Party was sort of the unveiling of former Premier Brad Wall's portrait at the legislature. Mickey, you were there. What was that ceremony kind of like, and what struck you about it?
It was really fun. I think everyone was extremely charmed by the former premier. He had the whole room laughing. Also, he gave you and Murray Mandrick, Wayne Mantika. You are Murray Mandrick. I'm so tired. And Wayne Mantika a shout out in the speech. I don't know if you heard it, but basically, former Premier Brad Wall came in the building, and for the first time to see the portrait unveiling, for the first time since retiring in politics in 2018, and he said nothing has changed. The pillars are the same, the stairs are the same. Then he said, Murray Mandrick and Wayne Mantika are the same, and that was one of the heartiest laughs in the.
I'm as old as the granite and at least twice as thick. So.
Yeah. But it was really fun, and the portrait is really nice, done by Phil Richards.
It is a stunning portrait, and yeah. I love portrait art. Like, just as a piece of art, people should just come down and take a look at actually that and all the art in the legislature, because this was a stunning piece. Really cool. But go ahead.
I was just going to say, I think for even us journalists, it was just a fun event to cover, and it was fun to have Brad Wall back in the building, and he was again here today. I saw him in his cowboy hat, and I took a selfie because why not?
Well, it's a good souvenir. Huh?
Yeah.
It's good. It's a good. There were a lot of cowboy hats actually. There. I noticed his son Coulter was wearing a cowboy hat out front and everything else, and yeah, it was sort of an interesting um, week in the sense that at times at the legislature, it really is a community, and even within the NDP, there was a lot of lauding of Brad Wall and his accomplishments. So in that sense, it was a day where I think they were kind of removed from the usual partisanship into more as Mickey described, fun activity and such. I guess I wish there was more weeks like that legislature. Maybe there will be. Hopefully, you'll be able to join us one more time, Mickey. We'll hopefully see another good week like that. But this is unfortunately all the time we have for today. Mickey, Jeremy, thank you so much for joining us, and we'll see you folks again sometime inside the Marble Palace.
Okay, bye.
See ya.